When I bought the house for my parents, my sister, who always had more privileges from my parents than me, wanted to get the house for herself, but I did not allow it, and she took revenge on me. Growing up, the difference in how my parents treated me and my sister was obvious. She was the golden child, the one they praised constantly, while I was just there, doing my best to stay out of trouble. They gave her more attention, more privileges, more everything. If she wanted something, new clothes, a trip with friends, extra time out, they made it happen. For me, it was always, "We'll see," or "Maybe next time." I didn't get it back then, and it stung. She'd get a pat on the head for AB on a test, while I'd bring home an A and barely get a nod. It wasn't about money either. We weren't rich, but they always found a way to spoil her. I learned early on that I wasn't the priority. As the years went by, I figured out how to handle it. I stopped expecting anything from them. I focused on school, then work, building my own life step by step. It wasn't easy, but I got to a point where their favoritism didn't eat at me anymore. I'd see her get a car for her 18th birthday while I was still taking the bus, and I'd just shrug it off. I told myself I didn't need their approval to make something of myself. And I didn't. By my late 20s, I had a decent job, savings, and a plan. Meanwhile, she was still leaning on them, coasting through life without much direction. Even with all that history, I never hated my parents. They weren't perfect, but they kept a roof over our heads and food on the table. I felt grateful for that, in my own way. So when I hit 32 and had enough money saved up, I decided to do something big for them. They were getting older, and their little rental place was falling apart. Leaky roof, creaky floors, the works. I bought them a house. Nothing fancy, just a solid 3-bedroom place in a quiet neighborhood. Paid for it in cash after years of scraping by. It was my way of saying thanks, even if they'd never said it to me. The house was a practical choice. It had a small yard, a new kitchen, and enough space for my parents to live comfortably. I handled everything: down payment, closing costs, even hired movers to get their stuff over there. They were surprised when I told them. My dad just nodded and said it was a good move, while my mom got teary and hugged me. It was the most affection I'd gotten from her in years. I didn't make a big deal out of it. To me, it was done, and they could settle in. I figured that was the end of it. Then my sister found out. She's 2 years younger than me, still living in an apartment she could barely afford, bouncing between part-time jobs. I didn't tell her about the house myself. She heard it from our mom during one of their long phone calls. Within a day, she was texting me. She didn't say congrats or ask how I pulled it off. Instead, she asked why I didn't talk to her first. I didn't get it. It was my money, my decision. I told her it was for mom and dad, not a family meeting topic. She went quiet after that, but I could tell something was brewing. A week later, she showed up at the new house. I was there helping unpack some boxes when she walked in, all smiles for our parents. She started going on about how nice the place was, how it was perfect for them. Then she dropped it. She thought it'd be better if she moved in too. She said she could help take care of them, since they were getting older. I saw through it right away. She didn't want to help, she wanted the house. Our parents didn't say no either. They just looked at each other, then at me, like it was my call. I didn't say anything then, but I knew where this was headed. My sister didn't let it go. After that first visit, she kept showing up at the house. She'd bring little things, groceries, a lamp she found at a thrift store, acting like she was already part of the setup. Our parents didn't mind. They liked having her around, and she played it up, cooking dinner one night, rearranging furniture the next. I'd stop by to check on things and see her there, settled in like it was her place. It wasn't subtle. She'd talk about how cramped her apartment was, how she'd love a fresh start. Mom started agreeing with her, saying it'd be nice to have her closer. Then she got bold. She called me one evening and laid it out plain. She said the house was too big for just mom and dad, that they didn't need all that space. She suggested I sign it over to her instead. She'd let them stay, of course, but it'd be in her name. Her reasoning was that she deserved it more since she'd always been there for them emotionally. I couldn't believe it. I'd paid for every cent of that house, worked overtime for years, while she'd never saved a dime. Now she was acting like it was owed to her. I told her no. Flat out. It wasn't her house, and it wasn't going to be. I said it was for our parents, not her, and that was final. She didn't yell or argue, she just hung up. I thought that might be the end of it, that she'd sulk for a bit and move on. But I underestimated her. She'd spent years getting her way with our parents, and she wasn't about to let me stop her now. I didn't know it yet, but she was already planning her next move. A few days after our phone call, things started getting weird. I got a call from my bank about some unusual activity on my account. Someone had tried to access it online, but the two-factor authentication stopped them. I changed my password and didn't think much of it at first, just some random scam, I figured. Then my boss emailed me about a complaint. A client I'd never worked with claimed I'd been rude and unprofessional, demanding I'd be fired. It didn't make sense. I hadn't talked to anyone like that. HR got involved, and I had to sit through a meeting to explain myself. They dropped it eventually, but it left a mark on my record. Then my car got towed. I'd parked it legally outside my apartment, but someone reported it as abandoned. I spent half a day and a couple $100 getting it back from the impound lot. At that point, I started connecting the dots. It was too much to be a coincidence. I didn't have proof, but I knew my sister had the motive. She'd always been petty when she didn't get her way. Back in high school, she'd spread rumors about a friend who wouldn't lend her money. This felt like her style, just dialed up. I called her and asked if she was behind it. She denied everything, said I was paranoid, that I'd always been jealous of her. Her voice was calm, almost smug. I hung up, frustrated but still unsure how far she'd go. I didn't tell our parents yet. I didn't want to drag them into it unless I had something solid. But I started watching my back, checking my accounts daily, locking down anything she could mess with. I had no idea she was just getting started. The next week, it got worse. I came home from work to find my apartment door unlocked. Nothing big was missing, just some paperwork from my desk, a few bills, and an old laptop I barely used. The place wasn't trashed, so it didn't look like a typical break-in. I reported it to the police, but they said without evidence of forced entry or major theft, there wasn't much they could do. I knew it was her. She'd been to my place before, knew where I kept a spare key under a loose brick by the stairs. I changed the locks and got rid of the spare, but the damage was done. Then my credit card got hit. Someone racked up charges, hundreds of dollars at stores I'd never been to. I disputed it with the bank, but it took days to sort out, and I had to cancel the card. Around the same time, my email got hacked. Random messages went out to my contacts, some coworkers, a few friends, saying I needed cash fast and asking them to send it. Most people didn't fall for it, but it was embarrassing. I spent hours resetting passwords and apologizing to everyone. My sister's fingerprints were all over it. She wasn't slick enough to cover her tracks completely. I found out later she'd used my old laptop to log into my accounts. I was furious, but still didn't have hard proof to confront her with. She was smart enough to keep it deniable, staying one step ahead. I started sleeping badly, checking my phone constantly for new alerts. Work suffered. I missed a deadline because I was too busy dealing with the mess. She was chipping away at my life, piece by piece, and I couldn't stop her yet. The chaos kept building. My sister's next move hit harder than the rest. I got a call from my insurance company saying my car policy had been cancelled. I hadn't touched it, paid up every month on autodraft, but someone had contacted them, claiming to be me, and shut it down. I had to scramble to reinstate it, driving illegally for a day while it got sorted. It cost me extra fees, and the agent said they'd flagged my account for fraud. I knew she'd used the paperwork from my apartment. My insurance docs were in that stack she took. Then my job took a hit. An anonymous tip came into HR claiming I'd been stealing office supplies and selling them. It was ridiculous. I'd never done anything like that, but they had to investigate. They pulled me into another meeting, went through my desk, checked my emails. It was humiliating. The evidence was flimsy, just a blurry photo of someone who vaguely looked like me, but it dragged on for days. I kept my job, but my reputation was trashed. People started looking at me differently, whispering when I walked by. I hit my limit. I drove to the house to tell our parents everything. They were in the living room when I got there, watching TV. My sister was there too, sitting on the couch like nothing was wrong. I laid it all out, the bank issues, the car, the insurance, the job. I didn't have proof it was her, but I said I knew she'd done it. She didn't flinch, just stared at me, while our parents sat there, stunned. They didn't say anything, but I could see the gears turning. Things were about to shift. After I laid everything out, the room stayed quiet for a while. My parents didn't jump to defend her like they usually did. My mom looked at my sister, then back at me, her face tight. My dad just stared at the floor. I didn't push them to say anything. I'd said my piece and left it there. My sister got up and went to her old room, the one she'd been using when she stayed over. I didn't stick around either. I drove home, exhausted, figuring they'd sort it out or they wouldn't. I was done carrying it all. The next day, my mom called. She said they'd talked to my sister after I left. She denied it at first, claimed I was making it up to turn them against her. But then my dad found something, a receipt from one of the stores where my credit card got hit. It was in her purse, crumpled up like she'd forgotten it. She tried to say it was a coincidence, that she'd shopped there too, but they didn't buy it. They started asking her about the other stuff, the car tow, the insurance, the job complaints. She got flustered, started blaming me for ruining her life by not giving her the house. My parents weren't fully convinced yet, but the cracks were showing. They told her to leave the house for a few days, to give them space to think. She packed a bag and went back to her apartment, complaining the whole way out. My mom said it was the first time they'd ever doubted her. I didn't feel triumphant, just tired. But it was a start. They were finally seeing what I'd dealt with all along. With my sister gone from the house, my parents started digging deeper. They went through her stuff, things she'd left behind in her room, and found more. There was a notebook with my old laptop's password scribbled in it, along with dates that matched when my email got hacked. They also found a burner phone, one I'd never seen her use, with texts to a friend about teaching me a lesson. It wasn't airtight proof, but it was enough for them. They called me over that weekend and showed me everything. My mom cried, saying she didn't know how it got this bad. My dad just shook his head, quiet. They confronted her again. She came back to the house, thinking they'd cooled off, but they laid out what they'd found. She tried to spin it, said the notebook was old, the phone wasn't hers, but it fell apart fast. She got angry, yelled that they'd always taken my side, which was so far from the truth it almost made me laugh. Then she stormed out, saying she didn't need them or the house. My parents didn't chase her. For the first time, they let her go without bending over backwards to fix it. After that, things shifted. My mom started calling me more, asking how I was, thanking me again for the house. My dad took me out for coffee one day, something he'd never done, and said he was proud of what I'd built. They didn't say it outright, but I could tell they felt guilty. My sister stopped coming around. She texted me once, calling me a snake, then blocked me. I didn't reply. The mess she made was still there. My job was shaky, my accounts a hassle, but she'd lost her grip on them. Months passed, and the dust settled. My parents kept the house, living there quietly without my sister's constant presence. They didn't talk about her much, but when they did, it was with a kind of sadness. She'd moved out of her apartment, couldn't afford it anymore, and last I heard, she was crashing with a friend across town. She didn't reach out to them or me, and they didn't push to bring her back. The favoritism that had defined our family for so long was gone, replaced by a strange, late honesty. They saw her for who she was, and they saw me too, maybe for the first time. I fixed most of what she'd broken. The bank sorted out the credit card charges, and I got my insurance reinstated without more headaches. Work was trickier, HR cleared me, but the rumors lingered. I started looking for a new job, something better, and landed one a few weeks ago. It pays more, and the people don't stare. My life's back on track, stronger than before. I don't check my accounts obsessively anymore, don't jump at every notification. The weight's lifted. Looking back, I don't regret buying the house. It was for my parents, not her, and they're still there, grateful in their own way. I don't hold the past against them. They didn't know better until she showed them. My sister's revenge didn't win her anything. She lost their trust, their support, and whatever edge she thought she had. I'm not bitter about it. I've got my own path now, built from scratch, and it's mine. That's enough.